I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando, where we truly go beyond the veneer. You'll experience the raw and the real of leadership. You'll see your feet not miles away from the top. We've heard the story before.
When you take a student who's the first in their family to get an opportunity to go to college and you help them not just go, but actually complete, what happens is a ripple effect that crosses the generations.
But who's solving it? That was Charles Thornburgh, CEO of Civitas Learning. His company is trying to solve some of the big problems in higher education.
You know, they really are. Last time we talked about the passion that runs deep at Civitas and how his great-grandmother really was a source of tremendous learning for him and how he thinks about leading and was probably the catalyst for him starting this company. He also shared about something that he calls a force multiplier. I love that word. Or words, force multiplier, and the image that creates in your mind. He really talks about how that effect actually happens when you have and experience incredible leadership like his grandmother.
So what'd you guys have the chance to talk about today?
Well, today you're going to hear more about how to do it. So as leaders, oftentimes we're pretty clear on what needs to be done. We get a little bit more fuzzy or get wrapped around the axle when it comes how to do it or why to do it. And so this episode, we're going to talk about the how. The last episode was more about why they do it. Charles has raised a lot of money. They've gone through a lot of changes that success and growth cause. And he talks very candidly about that. I think you're really going to enjoy his transparency, and I think you have a lot to learn. I asked him, what is your first recollection of being a leader? His response was great, and the rest of his insights are just as fantastic. Let's listen in.
My presidency of the 7th grade class, I think, is probably what I would go back to. And ironically, God, we're all awkward in middle school, right? What more awkward period of life is there? And I was awkward enough. I was living actually in South Florida at the time. I would routinely come home and, complain to my dad, I don't have any friends. Nobody really likes me. I was 6th grade, beginning of 7th grade, all the same thing. For some reason, I was inspired to try to run for president, despite being convinced that nobody liked me and I didn't have any friends. And I won, which resulted in a lot of mockery at home, frankly. I came back and said, oh, the guy with no friends, now you're class president. Huh? Like, I literally have no idea how that happened. But that was the year, actually, that the Challenger exploded. And I had a moment, again, few things more trivial from a position and leadership perspective than a, class president in a middle school. But I remember the way I was asked to give a speech to the student body when that happened, just after that happened. And I remember just feeling the weight of that, because that was a moment that even at that age, you knew it was something you were never going to forget in your whole life. And so there was this moment in time and this visceral emotional reaction that you were having, that other kids were having. There were counselors in talking to kids crying. And, I couldn't tell you today if I did a good job or a bad job at that, but I can certainly tell you that I felt that weight on my shoulders of needing to try to show up for people in that moment and being, undoubtedly woefully underprepared, which is a feeling I've had many, many times in my life in leadership opportunities. But it also, I think it put me in a position where after that, I was that much more aggressive in trying to get better at that, to get better at being convincing verbally, at being, supportive in those kinds of tough moments. And, to me, building business has always been about that. It's always been about just coming face to face with your shortcomings on a regular basis, getting comfortable with the fact that that's going to be a continuing process, and then trying to figure out how to go get a little less terrible at the things that you need to be good at along the way.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that. Some of the parts I love of that story is, you felt the weight. Right. And it's kind of interesting as we elevate and grow as leaders. I don't know that weight is ever lifted. Sometimes we shift it. Sometimes we hand it to someone else for a period of time. But nonetheless, we always feel the weight of people that depend upon us.
Yeah. And I've found in building business in particular, this business Civitas is the first that I've kind of taken from just an idea to the sort of scale we're at now. I've run bigger businesses that others have built, and I've certainly started a number of smaller businesses that I built. This is the first time I'm running through all those stages in between and recognizing that the things that look like a finish line from a distance, you run up to them and you realize it's actually the starting line. It's just another race. And now there's bigger and faster athletes and there's higher expectations and you've made more promises. And that weight is actually heavier. It's not, for me, we've raised a lot of venture capital at Civitas Learning and I get congratulations every time I go out after one of those raises. And, I'll sometimes flippantly say, congratulations on your last mortgage as well, as though that's a victory or an accomplishment of some kind. But the reality is every time I do that, I am signing up for another set of promises. And the weight of doing that it doesn't get easier, particularly the bigger the vision is, the bigger the impact of that you think you might be able to have, the more committed you have to be to trying to figure out how to be less terrible at your job and get better along the way. And, in some ways, the heavier that weight is, hopefully you feel like you're getting stronger and you can carry a heavier weight as you go, but it doesn't get easier.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that story because I was going to ask you specifically about that. You told me that is like you were getting a lot of congratulations and it was like, yeah, everybody gets to go off and be happy. Now I'm left with the weight of these promises that I've made.
That's right.
What are some things that you have done to help keep your sanity in check and hopefully not distribute the weight to others necessarily, but to just help carry that weight? What are, whether it's, different mentors, outlets that you have with your family, what are just different ways that you've kind of weightlifting exercises you've done?
Quite a few, really. When you and I first started working together, I think I shared with you that in a maybe 17, 18 year career in building educational businesses, I had spent approximately 0 days on professional development of my skill set as a business executive. And this business was one where I could see early on that the trend line, the trajectory of this business and the velocity at which it was moving were going to be different. And that fundamentally, if I didn't figure out how to get a lot better at my job, the business was going to leave me behind. And that didn't take any special vision to see that. It was pretty plainly apparent. And so really over the course of the last, sort of year and a half, 2 years in particular, I've joined YPO. I've started doing coaching work with you as has my team, working with another group in the Valley, a little more strategically focused on growing SaaS businesses. I've identified sort of a network of coaches and mentors who can contribute some of the real sort of learning that I need to be picking up and have spent a lot more time on that. So that's one kind of big category of just trying to go out and find people who've done it before, who've got a little different perspective and some more game film, and hopefully can help you see around corners a little bit and see what's coming next. The other piece of it, I think, is that I've had to really kind of blow up, in some cases, organizational structures, in other cases, my own calendar, repeatedly, because my job is, I'm on, I would say, the 7th job that I've had since I started Civitas, right? The title hasn't changed, but the job's changed dramatically. And so, the need not just to keep learning from those kinds of external sources that I just described, but the need also to recognize that you've got to take a pretty fresh look at how you spend every minute and every hour of each day. And you've got to do that not once or twice, but fairly continuously. We've been in the business now, started it 5 years ago. And I'd say probably, 7 or 8 times I've had to really kind of take a fresh look at how I'm spending my time. Does it make sense with where the business is right now? What are the biggest gaps in my own skill set between, who I need to be and who the business needs me to be at any given moment? Translating that all the way down to, there's some element of just presence there, like trying to be present as often as you can. And you mentioned family. So the other thing I've started trying to do recently is I've started trying to build a habit of starting the day with meditation. I'm not 100% there yet, and it's not a lot. It's kind of 10% or 10 minutes at a time. And I'm probably getting to it about 5 times a week instead of 7. But for me, it's really about trying to get better at just training my mind to be present in whatever the activity is at the moment, so that when I'm at work, I'm actually focused on solving the problems that matter the most at work. And when I'm at home, I'm focused on spending time with my kids and with my wife and really showing up in that way as well. So being, I think, just a little bit more purposeful about how I spend my time. I went through this exercise not that long ago of sort of asking myself and then looking back through and auditing my own calendar, looking backwards, said, so if someone else saw this calendar and didn't know me, would they have a pretty good idea of what I think is important, how much time I spend doing what? The answer to that was no. And so I went back and said, maybe I should be spending my time differently. I'm in the luxury of a position where I can, to some extent dictate how much time I spend on offense, right? Working on the things that I think matter most, and how much time I spend just on defense and being responsive to what happens in the business and inbound inquiries. And I haven't solved that at all, but that's kind of a work in progress for me, is how do I instrument my day, my calendar, my week, my month in a way that's representative of what I value and what I think that the people around me need the most from me.
Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's going to help a lot of people that are listening, because, there's a lot of chatter about work-life balance. Another CEO that I know that you know as well as Brett Hurt talks about, he terms it as work-life integration. Mm-hmm. And then just having those non-negotiables. And I think that's a very valuable exercise. I don't care if you're young, if you're just starting off in leadership, or if you're 70 years old, looking at how you spend your time and how you spend your money. Yeah. And just being objective about it. And just, and that's one of the things I appreciate about you. And I think it's a trend of the leaders that I'm fortunate enough to work with and learn from, is they're willing to be objective. They're willing to risk the best that they are so they can be the best that they have the potential to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the other things I would just add to that, I think that concept of work-life balance, I agree with Brett. I think it's a bit of a misnomer, but I also think there's kind of a third category that particularly a lot of CEOs and leaders tend to underappreciate. So if you think about how you're spending your time in terms of your work, in terms of your family, in terms of your sort of personal life, and call personal life health, just taking care of yourself, sleeping enough, exercising enough, eating the right way. The whole idea of balance, most of us, you ask most CEOs kind of to split up their time, and they're going to put it into one of two buckets. It's family and it's work. And the third one is an afterthought, right? The personal one's an afterthought. Feels selfish, feels like that's not the way we should think about spending our time. We're taking time away from work, or we're taking time away from family to do that stuff. And, in my experience, as the stresses in my life have gotten bigger and bigger, that perspective is antithetical to the way that I need to think about it to be successful. The way I have to think about it is you sort of start with, what does it take for you to be in the best position to do your best work and show up in the best way? And that is sleep and exercise and diet. It's figuring out how to do things that keep your cortisol levels down, that make you better able to deal with stress. For me, the connection between my brain and my mouth does not work nearly as well when I'm poorly rested, or I haven't been eating well, or I haven't gotten any exercise. And so I've had to teach myself this lesson recently, call it over the last 5 years or 10 years, that the only way for me to create enough space to try to be good at family and work is to make sure that I'm doing the things that I have to do to kind of build that foundation to be effective in terms of my own, sort of personal needs as well.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think there's a lot of executives, not just CEOs, that need to really rewind and listen to what you just said. Overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, but definitely not easy. Yeah. And just committing that time to yourself. Like I said, both the mental, the spiritual, the physical side of things. Yeah. We just don't do that, and that we deteriorate. And there's a lot, like I said, we were talking about earlier in this, a lot of people depend upon us. And if we're deteriorating, that's deteriorating.
Yeah. Well, and that whole opportunity to be a force multiplier as a leader, when you're deteriorating yourself, no one's going to look at you and want to follow you into battle. So again, you're going to, you abuse yourself bad enough, and eventually you turn around and look, there's nobody behind you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like Zig Ziglar used to say, he said, if you had $1 million racehorse, you wouldn't leave it out all night smoking and drinking and expect to get up, expected to get up in the morning and perform. Right. So that's a microcosm of it. I could literally go on for hours with you, and I would like to have you back on in the future. Great. But actually, we're sitting here at the airport and DIA. Charles was nice enough to fly in, and we spent a wonderful day together. And now he's got to get on a plane and head off to San Francisco to advance the mission.
That's right.
So
back to it.
Yeah. So I would strongly encourage you to check out Civitas Learning, CIVITAS learning.com. And
you can also find me on Twitter. I'm at Charles_EDU.
One more time.
At Charles_EDU.
Okay.
And I am not as good as I should be about tweeting often, but stuff I really care about does show up in that feed.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Charles, for taking the time to share with us. People listening, no doubt, have learned something today, and you taking this time is real important to me. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
I love that analogy of weightlifting and creating space.
Yeah, isn't that great, Chip? I mean, just the mental image that creates. You think about, weightlifting, and it is truly a very appropriate analogy because as humans, not just as leaders, we're constantly building muscles and or letting muscles atrophy. So it's one of the hardest parts of being a leader, thinking about what muscles you need to build, not only for yourself, but for the people in your organization so the organization can unlock and mature and stabilize into that next level of growth. So take a moment and think about it. Be introspective for a moment. What muscles do you need to build? What muscles does your team need to be building so your organization can unlock and evolve into that next level of growth? What do you need to let go of? What muscles do you need to actually let atrophy? Think about that analogy and how it can help you and your organization. So, what did you think about today's podcast with Charles? If you have any thoughts, suggestions, ideas for us, please go to foryouleaders.com. Once again, that's foryouleaders.com, and leave your thoughts, ideas, suggestions there. But also, it's a great place to subscribe to this podcast. Look forward to sharing with you in the future. I hope you have a blessed day.